opposition needs to come up here and say that no, schools actually should teach nationalism and they should promote ideals that one country is better than the other. So let's talk about why nationalism or why cosmopolitanism is better than nationalism. And we find that in history, so many of the problems in our world have been caused by nationalism. All of the world wars were fought because one country wanted to take over another place. We see that the issues in the Cold War were issues of nationalism, and that one country wanted to take over another and implement their ideals on how government works over another. We see the Serbian Balkan crises. All of that is based in nationalism, this idea that because of this country that we were born up in, we are better than you, we are going to take over your country and try to kill you and promote ethnic cleansing. We know that this stuff is bad, Mr. Speaker. We know that this is wrong, and that we should not promote this.
Sir,
wouldn't you agree?
Please explain to us why nationalism must exactly mean that you must hate other countries instead of just loving yours.
Because there's a fine line between nationalism and patriotism. And we think that patriotism is this idea of just being proud of your country. And we think that even within cosmopolitanism, you can be proud of yourself and proud of who you are without this idea that you're better than somebody else. Nationalism draws the line between confidence and arrogance. It's where you say that we are superior to you and that our country does things better than your country does. And because I was born on this plot of land, I am better than you. And we think that that's wrong. And we draw that distinction. And so why do we think it's important to promote cosmopolitan ideas? We think that promoting things like cultural tolerance is really fantastic thing to teach in school. We think that comparative government classes, where instead of just learning about the way your government functions, you learn about how other countries' government functions. And we think that that's important. We think that theology classes, things where you learn not just about the major religions in your country, but you learn about the major religions in other countries. And world history, where you appreciate what every country has contributed to society, rather than just yours. And when you do that, we see that there's a lot more cultural tolerance, that people appreciate everybody instead of just themselves. We think that tolerance is a really important thing for just social interaction, that people get along with each other better, that people are happier, everybody can interact in a much safer way when we promote things like cultural tolerance and if everybody understands each other. One other problem with nationalism that I want to talk about right now, I'll take you in a second, is that nationalism often avoids teaching the mistakes within your own country, and it's really important to talk about that. But first,
we don't believe that nationalism will be taught to the extent of actually bashing other cultures.
But we think that that's just what nationalism is, and that if you are propping up how good your country is, that is inherently bashing somebody else's culture. And that we think that, like I said, within nationalism, this idea of country pride and that we're the best, when you have stuff like that, you don't teach the mistakes that your country has made in the past. We think that it's really important for schools to teach that in certain countries past, there have been lack of tolerance towards minorities. And that countries should hide this kind of stuff in textbooks. They should talk about this and discuss it and say, yes, our country made mistakes by owning slaves or not promoting women's rights early enough in our history. We think that schools we think that schools around the world that promote genocide should talk about this stuff rather than cover it up. We think that schools in Germany should address the fact that the Holocaust happened and say, look, we made a mistake. We're different now. We're going to move on from this. They shouldn't just hide it in a textbook and say, this never happened. If you don't address these problems, then they don't get fixed. And you don't address these problems when you have nationalistic ideas and you say that, oh, our country's so great, we would never do something like that. No, countries do stuff like this all the time, and we need to fix it. So now let's talk about the harms of what happens when you don't fix this kind of stuff. And no, thank you. And first, we want to restate this idea that we value equality, that every person has equal rights. Why? They just do. Everybody deserves rights. Why is the sky blue? It just is. Why do humans deserve rights? We just do. But what happens when you say that one person deserves more rights than another, or that one person is superior to somebody else? When you do that, you knock out this idea of equality, and you can no longer justify the rights of anybody if there's not equality, because we stand on this idea that you can only base your rights on the idea that all humans deserve them, and that all humans deserve them equally.
On that point, sir?
No, thank you. So not only do we find a moral justification for valuing equality and valuing cosmopolitanism over nationalism. But we also think that there are so many practical implications of this, and that there are so many harms that can be avoided in the past if we stop ideals of nationalism. Like we said, millions of people died during world wars because of nationalism, because one country said, our government system is better than yours, we're going to invade you and kill your people and destroy your buildings and take over because we're better than you. And that's wrong, Mr. Speaker. It is wrong. We should stop this. We think it's wrong for people to be killing and promoting ethnic cleansing in the Balkans because of nationalistic ideas. We think that you absolutely must stop this. And a system of education where you don't promote propaganda, where you don't have ideals about your country being better than another. That's how you avoid this kind of stuff. We see clear examples in the past. During the Cold War in the United States, there were lots of nuclear bomb threat drills that the schools were forced to teach. And we think that during World War II, Hitler youth camps taught a lot of ideas about nationalism. And there was a ton of propaganda in the Soviet Union towards Stalin and towards Mussolini in Italy, where these dictators are idolized and forced to idolize people, and that everybody is promoted to do so. And we think that that kind of stuff is wrong, and there are so many practical implications and so many lives lost because people act like their country is better than another person. And if we stop things like that, we can stop so many wars and just promote a much better way of life for so many people. And for those reasons, we stand in proposition. Thank you.
Just a second. Just a second. Okay. Okay, fine. Thank you very much. I'm very happy to open the side of opposition by calling Aline.
Thank you. Now, what we believe is that Team Proposition is doing today, we believe that first of all, they are scratching the motion, and second of all, they don't really want to talk about what we really have to talk about. First of all, they scratch the motion because they talk about historical things that have happened because of nationalism. We don't believe that this is what they're supposed to be talking about. They're supposed to be talking about the effect on the kids in schools and the effect on the curriculum in the schools of what this nationalism being taught in schools has, not about the things that has happened because of the nationalism. Because what we believe is that these things, first of all, did not happen because nationalism is taught in school, and second of all, we believe that these things are extremism, and we are not talking about extremism today. Ladies and gentlemen, we will prove to you that we need our national pride. We will prove to you that we need a historical heritage through our two main points, which will be the first one. I will talk to you about historical heritage, and I will go into depth on that. And I will talk to you about the psychological boundaries of what the applying of this motion implies. No, thank you, sir. Now, before I do all of these, let's go into a few points of rebuttal. What we have to clarify is about this idea of nationalism and whatever. These are not mutually exclusive, ladies and gentlemen, and Team Proposition has failed to prove to us how these are not mutually exclusive, because, no thank you, sir, in a school you can actually teach that, well, you should love your country, and you can also teach you should love other countries and you should love other cultures. We don't believe that what they do is actually change anything. And we also have to clarify what nationalism really is. It is love to your country. It is not hate towards other countries. It is simply you loving your country. We believe that is abundantly clear. And even if it were to not be clear, we believe that what they have told us about like discrimination, about instigation to violence by the teachers is already punishable by law if it were under their definition. Now let's see about their second point, problems caused by nationalism. Now, I already responded to this. I said that this isn't caused by the fact that nationalism is taught in schools and that was extremism. No, thank you, sir. Now, let's move on to their next point about culture of tolerance. We have three things to say to this. The first one is that cultural tolerance is promoted even now in schools, at the same extent that it will be promoted when you actually remove this from the curriculum, even though we have no reason to, seeing as side proposition failed to present us with any reasons. Now, the second response we have to this is that the kids that are being taught this are not lied to. The historical facts are not changed. No, thank you, sir. The historical facts stay the same. What they are being taught in addition to the historical facts is that, well, even though your country got massacred, you were brave enough to go there and stand up to those people that attacked you. You were brave enough, and your country had some heroes. That is what nationalism actually teaches in schools, is not what team proposition believes. And the third response is that, well, in order to embrace other cultures, you need to know yours first. You need to actually know the values that you promote in your own culture in order to be able to understand other cultures. We believe that this is clear. And their next point was about mistakes happening. Well, we have two things to say to this. The first one, they don't really hide anything. Like, they believe that Germany doesn't teach the Holocaust. That is not true, ladies and gentlemen. We believe that the people in Germany are well aware of the fact that the Holocaust was a great mistake, and they teach that to their kids. And our second thing that we have to say to this is that actually societies evolve into solving these things by themselves. Societies actually evolve into solving this. And as I clarified, the nationalism does not equal discrimination. The other point false. So let's talk about what they had in plus practical things. Now, we believe that, first of all, teachers do not propaganda, ladies and gentlemen. They do not go into their classroom and start teaching political views. They do not do that. They just add a little flavor to that subject. Like I have told you before, they say that the people that fought in that war are national heroes, and the people that fought in that war are to be appreciated by the kids that we teach that classroom to. We believe that it is clear. And let's move on to my first point, historical heritage. Now, to explain what is the state curriculum supposed to be about. Now, we believe that the state curriculum is supposed to be about teaching a kid the full things, teaching the kid everything. We believe that, in a second, sir, part of this is teaching them about nationalism. I will elaborate on that after I take this point.
In Japan, they refused to recognize the rape of Nanking, which massacred 300,000 people in the status quo. What do you say about this? Because the Japanese government said they're inherently better than the Chinese people.
Okay, so what if they do that? What if the national government chooses to ignore that? It does not mean that the kids, one, will automatically believe that they did not do a great, bad thing. And second of all, it does not mean that it will be taught in schools, ladies and gentlemen. Now let's get back to my own point. We believe that nationalism should be part of the school curriculum because kids need to learn that their country did great things. Now, we believe that these countries actually did great things. We believe that in order for a kid to receive his full education, he needs to have the value of nationalism. But what is this value of nationalism? First of all, it creates a link between the country and the citizens that are in school, the citizens that are actually taught about their own values. We believe that is clear. And second of all, the value of nationalism is about embracing your country's values and being able to actually, for example, play a debate with the flag on the table. We believe that that is clear. And let's see about if the kid understands these values. If the kid understands values like heroes, like historical value, like the coolness factor, when, like for example, no thank you sir, doing the moon landing. It is cool to know that your country actually landed on the moon and stuck a flag there. It is very important for the kids to learn that. It is very good that they actually do right now. We see that, no thank you sir, this has a place in the curriculum. So we see that the kids learn to love this hero concept. We believe that they will want to help their country later because they learn these things. For example, they will understand the well-being of their state and they will want to stay in that state and help it as much as they can. In a second, sir, yeah.
So why can't humans just as a whole be inspired by the fact that we put somebody on the moon? Why should I say, oh, because he was from America, he's better, and that means I'm better because some guy from my country did it.
Okay, but it does not mean that the people in America are not proud that they put a flag on the moon. It does not mean that the kids that are taught in that classroom are not proud that they put a flag on the moon. That was my point. Now let's see about how this even improves the curriculum. The existence of nationalism actually improves the curriculum. Now we believe that first of all makes it easier to understand. It makes it easier to understand with concepts that the kids can actually relate to, with the concept of hero and the concept of history. But the most important thing here is that if we do not have nationalism under the curriculum, cultural heritage will disappear at some point. We believe that's in the modern society that we live in right now, in this progressive society, holding on and clinging on to the traditional values like nationalism is very important for us as people. It's very important that we actually know where our country started, where it is right now, and why. We believe that the cold-hearted curriculum, like teaching them, well, the Turks just massacred Romania, isn't the way to go. We believe that we need to know that our country's heroes were heroes, that they fought a great war, and we believe that let's see what I have told you today in order to prove our side of the house. I have told you that team proposition does not do its job today and doesn't really talk about emotion, and I have told you that through the point of historical heritage, we need to keep this in order to have a traditional value, and for our cultural sites and cultural heritage to not disappear. We believe that you should oppose the motion.
Just a second. Okay. Thank you very much. To continue line of proposition, I'm very happy to call for Tommy.
Debate is about learning to accept other cultures, to be able to switch sides and see the validity in the points of the opposition team or in the proposition team. Nationalism, on the other hand, is a one-sided debate, as it says that one single country is better than another. When the U.S. goes and invades Iraq or Afghanistan, we are saying the U.S. is better than everyone else. We all realize that this is not the thing to do. So, as a roadmap for my speech, I'll first begin by deconstructing the opposition's case. Second, I'll go on to re-emphasize the first 2 points made by the first proposition speaker. And finally, I'll bring up a third piece of positive matter, talking about the role of education and curriculum. First, the opposition's case is that there is historical heritage that must be able to be preserved. First, the heritage can easily be taught by the parents and by folklore. This is not the job of the state. The state is there as a minimalistic an education by the state is to teach about history and global context, not individualistic pride. Secondly, they do not justify exactly why this heritage is good in the first place. Yes, they can be proud that their country did something, but there's a distinction between pride and nationalism. I can be proud that, like, my parents did that, but I did serve something, but that does not mean that I have to say that my parents are the best parents in the world, although I probably do say that in the first place. Third, they completely misconceptualize the point of my POI, talking about the rape of Nanjing. Rape of Nanjing is when 300,000 people, over 300,000 people were massacred by the Japanese army in China, specifically Nanjing. What has happened to that? Japan, in the status quo, refuses to has actually revised every single national textbook to not include this information, to not tell the Japanese public about what they've done in the past, because they realize that it diminishes their reputation and their credibility with the people.
So,
there has been conflict between China and Japan for centuries at this point, and there's no clear distinction between the religious conflict because the religions are the attacks of religions are very similar. Which means that they are talking about specifically the distinction between two nations, where two people were born. This is evident that if we are allowed to use, the governments are allowed to use nationalism use nationalism in education, it allows them to hide and mask other things. This gets onto the POI that they brought about, about their responses on the proposition case. So let's go there now. They made the argument about how Germany currently teaches about the Holocaust and how that inherently proves that they've accepted the past. This was not the argument that the first proposition speaker was making. What he was saying was that under Hitler's regime, the Nazi youth was taught nationalism, that Germany, Nazi Germany was inherently the best country in the world, and that is what caused such bad implications. The youth is what we were talking about. Education. The youth was taught to tell the government, to tattle on their parents if the parents said anything bad about the government. There was no type of actual criticism of the government because the children would report them. Would you not disagree?
No, I do disagree. We believe that in the current world we have no more regimes, no more oppressive regimes that do this. We believe that prove to us in a real world.
Okay, that's cool, because what we're talking about is the practical implications of what happened. What has actually happened about nationalism and what happened when we educated individuals on nationalism in the past. Because the past is how we learn from our mistakes. If it is true that World War II was a bad thing, and the Tojo Empire, the Mussolini Empire, and the Hitler Empire were all bad things, and they advocated for nationalism and their education, it is inherently clear that we must learn from these mistakes. Let's talk about the second proposition argument about equality. This argument is stemming from the inherent principle that each individual is equal. It should not be based upon which plot of dirt you are born. This specifically, teaching about nationalism destroys the equality and the teaching of equality across borders because it is saying that only individuals from within your border are more important and technically more successful than other ones just because they were born within these borders. There is no other justification. People from the U.S. can be respectful and take pride in humanity as a whole. Of Russia getting the first satellite into space, it was Sputnik, or with other advances with humanity as a whole, and not specifically individualistic countries. Teaching about nationalism specifically destroys the equality of all individuals. Finally, off the first argument, they say that nationalism and cosmopolitanism are not mutually exclusive and can be taught together. But that is inherently not true, as cosmopolitanism says everybody's inherently equal because it's a global society, while nationalism teaches our society is the only society and the best society. Moving on to the third piece of positive matter for the proposition team, which is the obligation of education as a whole, and what curriculum should really be about. Education is about self-enlightenment. It's about individuals being able to choose and come to their own realization of what is good. Why? Is what a famous philosopher actually said. Why? That's Socrates. So the Socratic method of teaching is so famous because it allowed for individuals to come to their own realizations and conclusions about what was inherently good. He would walk around and ask his students, why, as a question of why is this actually true, and get to the fundamental crux of these arguments, and have the individualistic student come to these conclusions. Which proves that education is really about the individual self-actualization. However, if we allow the government to force upon these kids some type of nationalist views, it destroys their ability to make their own realizations and to come to their own conclusions. I'll take this after my opponent says his deal.
If you allow that, you believe that people and the kids will stop asking why. They will still question the curriculum, and they will still question if the nationalist things that are being taught are correct.
Excellent, because that is exactly where my piece of evidence, which is about to come up, answers this. Let's talk about gender stereotypes. We can all agree that gender stereotypes are extremely entrenched in modern day society, and we are currently working on destroying them. That a lot of the times men are seen to be and perceived to be more successful than women for some preconceived notion that is not actually based in reality. And that women little children, little girls, are supposed to play with dolls and boys little trucks. There was a study conducted that by the age of 2, little girls understood that they were supposed to play with dolls and makeup and not trucks and action figures, while the reverse was for little boys. What does this show you? That these kids are extremely susceptible and extremely malleable at such a young age. This answers his POI because he's saying that they will not ask why. They are not asking why because this is indoctrinated into them from the start. If we are indoctrinating them, it is very clear that they are not making their own choices for themselves. The principle behind all of this is the freedom of choice and allowing these individual children to be able to come to the realization of whether or not they truly like their government. The U.S. At our school, we all happen to go to the same school. They don't really teach U.S. pride or why the U.S. is so good, and I really don't appreciate the U.S. that much because we have done so many horrible things in the past. Why am I able to come to this realization? because they do not force it down my throat or force it down any kid's throat, because they realize that kids should be able to come to these choices. It is the individual choice of the children to determine their views upon a government. In the same way, Japanese children do not view their government badly because they do not know about the rape of Nanjing. They have not the ability to be able to criticize because they do not have the knowledge to do so, which means I am proud to propose the motion today.
Thank you very much. To continue the side of opposition, I'm very, very happy to call for Raluca.
Ladies and gentlemen, the proposition says that nationalism is a one-sided debate. Well, we believe that it is a one-sided debate because they bring this kind of definition. We believe that there is an inherent difference between nationalism as a justification for war and the way that nationalism is taught in schools. We beg the proposition to understand this and to continue their case on this line. Otherwise, there is no way that they can actually prove it. More than this, it is very sad that I'm the fourth speaker in this debate and I'm only the second one to actually talk about the motion, to actually talk about schools, because the only thing we have heard from the proposition is why nationalism as a justification for war is bad. We haven't heard about schools. Actually, we have heard a little bit when they were talking about what we said. We haven't heard in their case anything that actually proved to us why nationalism as it is in schools is inherently bad. And again, we beg the proposition to see what they do about this. No thanks, sir. Now, more than this, I'm gonna have three main points in my speech. First of all, I'm gonna analyze everything they said. Second of all, I'm gonna analyze the idea of full education, and I'm gonna talk to you about what the role of education is and why we need nationalism here. And third of all, I'm going to talk about the psychological impact on the kids when we talk, when we teach nationalism or when we don't. So, moving on to my first point, let's look a little at what they said. They bring up this idea of, we're basically denying a lot of things. That countries as a whole, they deny a lot of things, but we believe that this is called extremism. We don't want to talk about this. They talk about Nazi Germany, where in schools, kids weren't taught certain things. We believe that this is not even something that we should be talking about. We believe that we have no way of controlling these kinds of regimes. What we want to talk about is the developed world, is the world that where we have liberal thinking that we can actually debate about. We believe that this is not fair on the proposition. More than this, the whole thing about denying the Holocaust, we believe that this is not even relevant. Denying the Holocaust is actually punishable by law. We don't believe that this is in any way manipulating kids or anything like that. We believe that they are not talking about the right things. We believe that they never even talked about how everything affects the kids. We believe that this is the whole role of education in society. We believe that in order for them to prove that nationalism has no place in the curriculum, they need to talk about the people that are affected by the curriculum, which is the kids. We believe that this is what they should be doing. More than this, kids can actually, no thank you, be lied to. We believe that when we tell us something that is completely absurd, they will not buy it. Kids are inherently curious. And more than this, because of this, let me go to my second point. Go.
Yes, inherently kids in that they're very impressionable, such as the example of 2-year-old girls already understanding that they have a certain gender role that they cannot get out of.
Thank you, sir. This is exactly what I was doing now. So let's talk a little about full education and this whole idea about kids in order for me to actually tackle this point. We believe that the role of the school is to actually form the kids in a lot of ways. We believe that what it is doing is to using the curiosity of the kids in order to teach them something. And this whole point about education is about the individual, which is basically the only thing that we heard from Team Proposition about education. We have three things to say to this. First of all, we believe that kids are inherently curious. We believe that kids will always ask themselves why. Because kids always want to know and are curious about how the world works. And therefore we say that nothing like propaganda that brainwashes kids, which seems to be what Team Proposition says, is going to happen in school. And secondly, no thank you. We talk about, well, the idea of nationalism is taught to kids, as Aline has told you, because it makes it easier for them to understand. We see that when we talk to kids about how adventurous our heroes are. And when we talk about the war, we're not just saying, we were massacred. We're saying that we might have been massacred, but we were brave. And we believe that this kind of turns the whole curriculum, for instance, for history, into a story. We believe that kids emphasize with that, and this is the best way for them to actually understand. No, thank you, sir. This is why we believe that this whole thing about education falls on our side. We believe that when we talk about kids, we need to understand that first of all, they are inherently curious, and second of all, we are using nationalism not as a way to manipulate them, but as a way to actually help them understand better, which actually is this whole thing about the hero concept. So this leads me nicely to my third point, which is psychological impact. But before that,
Team Opposition keeps claiming that the kids are so curious. If they are so curious, why do they not challenge the gender roles when they are taught by the age of 2?
they were 2 years old, ladies and gentlemen. Kids of 2 years old do not question that much, but we're talking here about school curriculum. We're talking about kids that are about age of 7. This is when they start becoming curious. This is when they start questioning how the world works. We believe that when you are 2, you are not taught nationalism. You are taught that, look, go play with your kids. This is not relevant for this debate, and we beg in proposition to not talk about this anymore. Talk about more relevant things. We beg of you. Now, let's just move on to my substantive point, the psychological impact. So we see that kids are inherently affected by what they hear when they are at school. And we see that the role of nationalism in class is basically telling them the fact and adding some nuance, some assurance of a country's braveness in these situations. For instance, the text, no thank you, sir. The text country X invaded and massacred your country becomes country X invaded and massacred your country, but we were so brave that we have stood up and now we are okay. We believe that this is great for 2 reasons. First of all, it is because it is the truth, ladies and gentlemen. We didn't add anything that is not true. We simply said the truth with no more nuance. And second of all, we believe that this is great because it actually is helpful for a kid also at the psychological level. We believe that instead of hating country X that invaded his country, he will focus on saying, look how brave my country is. Instead of hating the fact that he was invaded, he will love the fact that his country was brave. We believe that this is great. We believe that this actually gets this whole hatred that the proposition seems to think that is going to happen. And he transforms it into proudness, into love for his own country. And we believe that this is great for the kids. One more thing why we believe this is great on a psychological level is because some kids are not ready to hear it like simply, you were massacred. Some kids would be scarred for life if they didn't hear some assurance that we got up on our feet. We believe that this is what nationalism is about. It's about assuring your kids. It's about telling your kids that your country is brave enough in order to get up. Your country is brave enough. So this is why actually nationalism alleviates at the psychological level every bad impact that school curriculum could actually have. So for all these reasons, we beg you to oppose. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. To summarize the debate on side proposition, I'm very happy to call for Timothy.
In a world in which open-mindedness is greatly valued, in a world in which we have a multitude of cultures, ideas, races, and religions, in a world in which education should be about teaching acceptance, tolerance, and a world view of opinions, we must not force upon our children and our future with education a tunnel vision view of the world that propagates discrimination, unaccountability, and propaganda, especially with an education system that should be teaching unbiased ideas. So in my speech today, I will be talking about why our side is superior to theirs on three main areas. Firstly, on the area of policy, politically. Secondly, on the area of socially. And then thirdly, on the area of the education system itself. Now first, let's look at this on the first layer of class,
Sure.
of politically, of which side supports more political cohesion, more political cooperation. What we say on side proposition is that nationalism allows governments to propagate certain ideas that they find to be true, certain ideas that they find to be beneficial to themselves. That with adding nationalism to a school curriculum that's supposed to be teaching math, science, history, and English, that allows governments to be able to propagate the ideas that they want to be propagated. That allows them to cover up certain parts of history that they don't want the children to learn about, such as in Japan, a democracy, a developed nation, a Western liberal democracy, as side opposition wants to talk about in this debate today. In Japan, this democracy, they covered up the rape of Nanking, a situation in which the Japanese soldiers went into China, raped the woman, killed 300,000 people, and the Japanese justified their cover-up by saying, oh, we're allowed to because governments can teach nationalism. Governments are allowed to control the education system and promote this biased education. And what we also say is that children will have a tunnel vision view because they're learning about so much nationalism in their education. We say that they should be learning about world history, not about nationalism. They should be learning about both sides of a war, not be learning about this hero concept. They've been talking a lot about how countries have been, about the invaded countries. But we need to talk about the invaders. What motivated those invaders? It was nationalism that motivated the invaders that were invading these countries. And then they talk about this hero concept, that these people are glorified so much. And their only example was the astronauts. Now what we say to the astronauts is that was propagating a cycle of cover-ups too. That these children only learned about, we had one man on the moon. But what they didn't learn about was all the failed missions before, all the monkeys that we sent up into space, the people that died in order to get those two people up onto space, as well as the space race that occurred between Russia and the United States, the militarization of space, the Sputnik crisis, That we see that by having this hero concept, that it is a complete cover-up to the actual harms associated with the actual ideal. What we also talk about is that children are the future of policy, that they are our political future. They're our future policymakers. And if we make them into complete nationalistic propaganda children, just like the Nazi youth, then we make policy very one-sided and create more political tension within our world. We need to have a worldview in order to be accountable. We cannot just have this hero concept in which they believe that their country is superior to others because we're so brave, we're so good, and those countries were evil for trying to invade us because we're so amazing. We were able to drive them out. But now let's move on to the second area of social, about how kids are very impressionable. But first I'll take your point.
The whole idea about the psychological impact is that kids will get the hatred that they will feel for the country that invaded.
Yeah, they'll get hatred for the country that
their own country.
Exactly. They'll feel hatred for the country that invaded as well, which creates more political tension, which creates more hate within our world, which is not something that we need in a world with a multitude of ideas and a world in which we should have a world of view. We need to see this from two perspectives, not from one that side opposition is advocating for. We should see wars from both sides, just as we do in debates, not from just one side. If we see it from one side, then that propagates tension, that propagates hatred, and that propagates discrimination. And that's what we cannot advocate for in this debate today. Now let's come back to this idea of social harms. We have already talked about how kids are very impressionable, and they agree. Kids are impressionable and they're very curious. They want to learn about things. And what we say is that they use that curiosity as a tool. They use that curiosity in order to propagate ideas that they want within these children. They talked about the hero concept. They talked about how these children will learn so much about how their country is good. But what we say is that that is a complete harm. That because they're only learning about the good of their country, that they're not learning about the bad. It is not a worldview. It is a singular tunnel view. That kids will believe what is taught to them, especially by their teachers, especially by this education system that is supposed to give them a future. If you're implementing nationalism within this very important and very intrinsic part of a child's childhood, then you are creating a child that is very, very sheltered and very, very focused upon their own nation and not a world view. And furthermore, we also talked about how empires existed because of nationalism. We talked about the Hitler Youth. We talked about Mussolini implementing nationalism within his education system. We also talked about Japanese cover-ups. And then I'll bring up two more examples. Let's talk about North Korea and their education system. We see in North Korea, they only talk about North Korea. Heck, they thought that they won the World Cup. They thought North Korea won the World Cup. If you would have asked any North Korean child, as we're talking about this debate today, they would have thought they won the World Cup. Because we see that education systems, when you give governments the power to manipulate them, they can do whatever they want to them. And they can manipulate all the information that's going to these very impressionable and curious children. And then we also talked about, let's go back to these empires. We say that in the modern day world, that empires don't exist, as side opposition has said, because we have stopped the teaching of nationalism. We've stopped the dominance of nationalism. Because all the way that these empires were staying in power was because this nationalism was being propagated within their children, within their teenagers, within their adults. And we see that that has created a cycle of hatred. But now let's come back to the third area of clash, on education, on what is the actual purpose of education and whether nationalism has any place within the education system. What we say on side proposition is that education should be an unbiased teaching of ideas and an unbiased teaching of cultures. It should be a world view. But nationalism is not a worldview. It is not an unbiased teaching of cultures. It is a culture of cover-ups. It is a culture of glorification of one singular nation. It is a culture of saying my country is better than yours because we will be able to defend against your invaders, because we have a better culture, because we have a better policy, because we are more politically correct. We say that nationalism is very harmful because it is a biased way of educating our children, and the education system has no place for biased education, and we say that children are being completely harmed by this. That children are the most impressionable, and by implementing this within the education system, they'll have this hammered and forced down their throats, and they'll become very tunnel visioned and very one-sided when they grow up and try and make policy and try and talk with other nations. And we see we are creating a world in which discrimination is glorified, in which governments are allowed to manipulate the education system, and in which our children are not prepared to deal with the future, to deal with the worldview that they need to have. And this is why we must not have nationalism within the education system.
Thank you very much. Close this. You okay? Okay. To close debate on side opposition, we're happy to call for Monica.
Ladies and gentlemen, we have witnessed 24 minutes of rebuttal and constructive point from the side of the proposition today, only to hear how nationalism is actually extremism and discrimination in the eyes of the proposition today, and not actually give some reasonable example that we could debate on today, and more than that, not even talking about real effects on our children, and not even actually good analysis point on how actually children think and how children will perceive this the idea of nationalism. But to prove to you today that education is actually about making good citizens in the state that they live, turning children into responsible citizens, not just about touching objective things and stuffing information into children's head. We believe that today, Team Opposition is going to prove to you today that nationalism does in fact have a place in school. And in order to prove you that, I'm going to have 3 points. First of all, talking about turning nationalism into extremism. Second of all, talking about psychology of children. And third of all, talking about cultural heritage and cosmopolitan society. Starting with the first point, and we believe that the difference between nationalism and extremism is actually the hate. We believe that the hate has nothing to do with nationalism. We believe that nationalism combined with hate for other states is what creates extremism, and that is exactly what Team Proposition has been talking about throughout all the debate. Now, thank you, sir. We believe that nationalism is about going to your child and telling him that you should love your country, you should be proud that you are part of this country. We see actually no place for telling your children that that country is bad. We are talking about making the country look good in the eyes of the children, but we are not doing that by saying that other countries are bad. Now, we believe that... No, thank you. We believe that Team Proposition all has been talking about, not about teaching nationalism in school, but about using nationalism as war justification. We believe that it is a very different thing. We believe that we are not talking about telling children that we justified our wars through nationalism. We are only going to tell our children that, well, your country, you should be proud that you live in this country, and you should be proud that your country did good things. We believe that war justification through nationalism is not actually a precedent effect that is going to come up only because we teach our children nationalism in our society. Now, talking about not teaching the mistakes of the state to the children. Team Proposition has been just talking about Japan and that example when the state actually denies the state. And well, we say that is one thing that the state denies the crime and another thing that it is not taught in schools, because Team Proposition has not showed not even one example of what could happen to children if they simply do not know these things. If they simply do not know that 1,000 or more soldiers went and raped some women. They have not showed not even one effect on the children that do not know this thing. And we believe that more than that, countries do actually admit that they have done mistakes, like for example in Germany, that actually admits today that that it has done mistakes in the past, and actually but teaches their children that even if we have done those mistakes, now we are good, and now we have a nice economy, nice politics, and we want to have good citizens. Yes, sir.
The reason why Germany is accepting these mistakes is because it realized that nationalism is what caused them to go down that path into darkness with Hitler.
Alright, sir. Just because the fact that nationalism was used as war justification, then in the World War II, when Hitler actually used this justification to make people go to war, that does not mean just by teaching our children we are teaching them to go to war. We are just teaching them to stand up and actually accept the fact that they are living in a good country and actually make them love the country in order to cooperate with the country and actually understand all the measures the country is taking in order for everything to work. No, thank you. Now, moving forward to the second point and talking about the psychology of children. Now, team proposition has been telling us that we want to indoctrinate our children through nationalism. They have given us the example of North Korea. Well, we believe that just because the countries tell that North Korea has told these children that they were the parents of the World Cup, this does not mean that children love the regime, that children or adults actually feel the regime as a good one. Well, no, ladies and gentlemen, like it also happened in the communist regime, that people, even if they were told that they should love and adore Stalin, that does not mean the regime did not fall because of revolution, because people were not feeling that the regime was justifiable to them, even if they were taught and indoctrinated by oppressive regime to actually adore the dictator. Now, we believe that that is again a different situation, because we are not telling children to adore the president or to worship the state. We are just telling them that it's good to love your state, that it's good to be part of the state, that you should be proud that you are raised here and you are getting the best things you can from your politicians and from the rulers of your state. Now, moving on to what children actually empathize with. Well, we believe they empathize with good things. They empathize by telling them, look, you have national heroes that you should be proud of. Because at that age, we believe that that is what children want to believe in. They want to believe in people that did great things for them, not that an oppressive country came and killed thousands and thousands of their ancestors. We do not want to grow that hate. We want to actually grow love to their country, not hate to other countries. Because we believe that when you tell a kid that actually a country came over your country and actually massacred thousands of your ancestors, that kid is going to understand that that country was bad, that that country was a bad thing that happened to your country. But when you tell him that that country came and attacked your country, but we stood up and defended our land, they actually shift their
Honest point, man.
no, thank you. They actually shift their thinking to the fact that we have heroes, because that is why children empathize it. They shift actually the hate to actually love to their country, and that is what we want to create in our society. We don't want to grow love, to grow hate. We want to grow a society in which children can understand that their country actually was going through a lot of trouble, but came out of it, and that is what actually we want our citizens to believe when they grow up. That even if our country is having some trouble right now, that does not mean that our country is not good. That does not mean that our country will not do good things for its citizens. Now, moving on to the last point and talking about cultural heritage and cosmopolitan society. Now, we are talking about the loss of cultural heritage, and we believe that will happen not because people in remote villages will stop doing it. We are talking about the children will stop caring if they are not taught by little to love their country and love their culture, because that is the society we live in. We live in a society with a lot of cultures that is going toward globalization, and we believe that if we not keep to these values, we are going to lose it because people will stop caring. And more than that, we believe that in a global society, the important thing to have is actually embracing cultures, not giving up to them. Embracing your culture first of all, and then going to tell others that your culture is good, embracing their cultures, and so on and so forth. So for all these reasons, I hope today that you oppose the motion. Thank you.
To close the debate on side opposition.
Advil? I have some in my bag. Do you want some Advil?
I don't know. I'm just having. No. I think it's okay now.
Okay. I just want to make sure you just think about it.
To close the debate on side opposition, I'm happy to call for Tommy. No, sorry, for Alim, sorry.
ladies and gentlemen, let's see what happened in this debate. In order to prove to you what our side has done today, I will be going to three main points. The first one, I will be talking to you about what we have been debating about culture and heritage. In the second point, I'll talk to you about the propaganda and about what the opposition has been bringing to you today. And the third point, I'll be talking to you about the reality of the values that we have been promoting throughout this debate and all of this. Now, let's see about our first point, culture and heritage. Now, we believe that we have to look at what the curriculum is about right now through the filter of national pride. Like we have said when we first came here to talk to you about this, through the filter of national pride, through the filter of national love, and see how the curriculum is actually changed by this filter. And we have told you that, well, first of all, the people are not like, the kids are not like to. The facts do not change. And this is what Team Proposition failed to believe today. They failed to engage on this. The fact that the facts that the people are taught in history, for example, are not changed, ladies and gentlemen. And we have been explaining this to you throughout our speeches. We believe that it is clear that if we do teach things through national perspectives, we do not only teach about our country. We also learn about all the countries in the world, but Team Proposition seems to not believe that. They seem to believe that you have this one-sided view, and when you go to school to learn, you're only learning history about your own country. That is simply not true. You do learn because the curriculum is designed so that you have a full education, as we have been telling you. And we believe that in order to have this full education, you also need to know about the great things that your country did. And if you do not actually have this nationalism, we have been telling you throughout our speeches that the culture and heritage will actually disappear. The culture and heritage will actually get lost along the way, and the people will not actually feel this love for their country anymore. We believe that it is clear that, for example, we have been telling you that in order to understand other cultures, you need to know yours first. They never responded to this. We believe that on this point, we were the right ones. Now let's talk about propaganda and about the case of Team Opposition. Now they talked about nationalist propaganda, and they talked about nationalist acts and the denial of war crimes, and they talked about discrimination. Now we believe that first of all, the first one, nationalist propaganda, it does not happen in schools, ladies and gentlemen, as we have been telling you. If it is done by the government, it does not mean that it is put in the school curriculum. We are perfectly against what the government does. We do not believe that it is put in the school curriculum in order to actually affect the kids in order to do this. Now we believe that they, second of all, have been talking about these war acts. We believe that these war acts are denial of war crimes. That is a completely different things. It has no connection to the actual curriculum. And they were talking about discrimination and instigation to this. We believe that, again, this does not happen in schools. If it were to happen, it is punishable by law. And in the third point, let's talk about the values that we have been having in this debate up so far and the reality of them. Now, we had this value of education as a whole, ladies and gentlemen, of the kid learning about everything, of the kid learning to love his own country, of the kid learning to have this. And what they said is that the kids need to come to their own conclusion. We believe that they still do come to their own conclusion, only that the full truth is being open to them. We believe that that is abundantly clear. And the other value that we had was keeping our historical heritage and keeping our cultural value throughout this nationalism that is being taught in schools, that we have been telling you about this hero concept that they so refuse to believe. And we have been telling to you that what they teach is not about the war crimes, is not about this. They actually just teach a more nuanced view of history, for example, and actually that improves the curriculum. So through all of these reasons, we believe that in today's society, nationalism still has a place in the curriculum. We beg of you to oppose.
Thank you very much. To close this debate, I'm happy to call for Tommy.
This debate becomes very easy to adjudicate, as the debate breaks down into two categories, the principle debate and the pragmatic debate. It's very clear Team Proposition is going to be winning on both, because we are the only ones who actually justify our principles and the only ones who have facts to justify our pragmatics. talk about the principles. There are two principles on the proposition side. The first is equality, and the second one is freedom of choice. Let's talk about equality. Equality is teaching that everyone is inherently equal, that everyone, no matter which plot of ground you're born on, should be considered as an equal. Teaching nationalism destroys this fundamental principle of equality because it says that because we are born in this certain country, we are better than others. Yes, even if it is just love for that country, that is putting them on a pedestal. It is bolstering that one country over everyone else. It is impossible to say that if they take pride in just one country, that they think that all countries are equal, because that one country will always be better than the rest. The equality of all individuals is always going to be more important than their cultural values, as it is a global society today. We have planes that are able to fly across the world, and we are constantly exchanging cultures, especially here at the World Schools Tournament. It becomes very clear that developing an equal and more globalistic society is much more important than these fundamental actual values. In addition to that, they've never justified to you today why these cultural values are unique or important, which seems to make their argument fall. But even if you do not like the argument about equality, let's talk about the argument of simply education. Education is supposed to be there to allow for the kids to be able to make their own decisions and to come to their own conclusions. Like I said earlier, Socrates, why is he so famous? Because he asked the question, why? Why do we actually believe in team oppositions saying that these kids will actually come to their own conclusions? That is factually incorrect. If children do not question these gender stereotypes, or not and their response to these to our evidence was, well, they become curious at different ages. It doesn't make sense to say that there is a distinction between little children and slightly older children, because if they were curious the entire time, then they would be curious and would not only go for the gender stereotypes. It becomes very clear that the children are not making their own decision. The decision is instead a false decision that they're coming to their own conclusions, because this theme of national pride, national greatness is shoved down their throat. They are forced to believe this if they're constantly taught this from a young age. Now, this argument by itself, independently, is another justification why team proposition is winning on the principle debate, because the freedom of choice is the reason why we care about our national culture. National culture only matters to us if we choose to appreciate this national culture, and if it is not our actual choice, but rather a false choice, it should not be a valid choice. Now let's talk about the pragmatic debate. Pragmatic debate, which team opposition has completely mishandled. They've been continually saying that that nationalism is extremism. That's exactly what it is. Nationalism is extremism. It has been, as I quote the team opposition, it has been used as a justification to go to war. What does that mean, ladies and gentlemen? It means that nationalism is inherently not a good thing to be teaching these children, because if we are trying to teach people in the Balkans to hate Serbs for the Balkan Wars, it will only lead to more Balkan Wars. Another great example, again, is in Japan. There have been tensions between Japan and China for centuries. And what has happened is there are increased tensions between them too, and there are ultimately the denial of a genocide. Now let's take a step back, just to close this debate. It is very clear what the debate is about, whether or not education is good, nationalism is good in education. We brought to you multiple arguments specific to why in education, there's a unique role of being able to teach these kids these good principles. And pragmatically, if we don't do such things, it becomes detrimental to society as a whole. Thank you.